record our discussion. Okay, so what I'm going to do, Eliza and Bianca, you are two at the first of the list. It's in alphabetical order, so that's how we're going to go. I'm going to ask you to unmute your microphone. All right, Eliza and Bianca. And so just tell me what you thought of the documentary. What spoke to you? What part of the documentary reached out to you? How does it compare to what we are doing today? So forth. Go ahead. Bianca, I see your microphone is unmuted. Okay, go ahead and go.
Okay, so I really liked how they all wore masks and they really enforced it.
That's good. That's good. Anything else about the masks in particular?
How when World War One ended, they all went to a parade and they were still all wearing masks.
That's interesting because the other class sort of made a comment similar to this, but they were talking about today's, how they felt it was an infringement on their rights to wear masks today. That's what people are saying. But back then, they just got out of a war. They were very patriotic, and they saw wearing a mask as a patriotic thing to do, right? So that's interesting. That is interesting. And then the thing that you pulled up, that you notice that even during that parade, everyone is wearing their mask. They're celebrating, and they're still, they're wearing it, and they're doing it in a patriotic way where they're feeling patriotic to do it. That's good. That's good. Eliza, your microphone.
Yeah, so I found it not upsetting, but just a little sad that there's more people that died from the flu than an actual world war. Because more people died during this pandemic, I guess you could say, the 1918 one, than they did in World War I, whatever. Which is kind of odd when you see that both people are dying on both sides. So you think there'll be more deaths in a war than a flu.
That's interesting. Yeah. Keep going. I'm sorry.
It said it affected people 20 to 40, which is different from what we have now for the corona, because it affects people that are older. So I'm guessing 40 plus. So.
Whoa! 40 plus is old. Maybe
no, of course not. 40 plus is middle age. I'm so sorry. Let me clarify. 40 and plus is middle age.
Thank you. Yeah. Whoa.
I feel attacked, Albert. I feel attacked also, sir.
Yeah.
Wow, Eliza. Wow.
Y'all look like y'all 20s.
It just backfired on me. Whoa. But I get your point, Eliza. It's a very good point. So this COVID virus is hitting people in their late 60s and older, and it is hitting children pretty aggressively as well. But it's the people who are in young teenagers and young, 20s are stronger. Except the pandemic back in 1918 did the opposite. It didn't mean it didn't affect young kids and the older population as well, because it did affect everybody. But it had a greater concentration of people being affected who were in that prime of their life. And we're still today trying to figure out why. We don't know why. We were speculating, but we don't know why. So it's a very good point. Very good point. So thank you, Eliza and Bianca. The next two are Carlos and Christopher. All right. So let me go ahead and unmute your microphone. And Carlos, and that's Christopher. There you go.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I just wanted to say that I thought it was scary, actually, how the old man, when he was young, how he was just sitting on that box of dead people, and he literally got sick from that.
And I don't know if we were able to discuss that yesterday on why.
I don't think so, because we saw it just today.
Okay. Oh, so that part we started exactly where we ended off yesterday. I was trying to overlap a little bit, but if I didn't bring it up yesterday, a virus is a different entity than a bacteria. A bacteria is a living thing. It is a cell. It does have its own, systems for reproducing. A virus doesn't. A virus is this little set of instructions, and it needs something else to reproduce and to live and to survive. So a virus itself isn't considered a living thing. Viruses they can live for 100 years or a year or weeks. And some of them live as little as just a few seconds outside a body. So they range. So yeah, that little kid, or that guy who was being interviewed, who was a kid back then, sitting and just being around something, just because the bodies were dead doesn't mean that they weren't infectious. So that's a very good point. And we're dealing with kind of the same thing today. Remember, I said that, I don't know if I brought this up yesterday with this class, the crematoriums were full. China said the only way to ensure that no one gets furtherly infected, everyone had to be cremated. They weren't burying bodies. And so that's a really good point on how that virus actually spread. So we think now it was something closely related to an H1N1 virus. So the H1N1 didn't just exist back in 2002. This may have been the starting port for an H1N1 way back in 1918. Thank you. Very good point. So that was Christopher. Who else was? Yeah. Christopher and Carlos. All right. Yes. Tell me what you think. Carlos, anything on the movie, on the documentary? I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to think.
Don't feel you have to give some kind of profound or technical part about the movie. Just be honest about what you feel about it.
It's just seeing how people wear the mask then versus now.
What about that? Can you go more into detail?
The reasoning behind it, like then, how you said, they were very patriotic about it, like wearing your mask for the military or whatnot. But now how they're saying it infringes on their rights.
People are saying that now, right? But do you think people today, I mean, not everyone, some people are saying that now. And even, I found it really strange in the documentary that someone got shot because they refused to wear their mask. That happened recently. I don't know. It was at a store too. It was at like a Walmart or something. It's so much news popping up today. It's hard to keep track. But somebody got shot because they refused to wear a mask. And that was just, I can't believe that we're at that stage today compared to back then. Like we don't seem to be any better. The virus changed. I'm always asking myself this question: what is different between then, and what is the same between then and now? And the virus is different, but people still seem to be the same. And it's been 100 years. Our technology is way different. We have technology that we know about viruses. We can sequence a gene from a virus within a week once we identify it and start looking at producing vaccines. But we're not acting that much different from back then. I just find that so strange. That technology and viruses and other organisms are evolving at such a fast rate, but we don't seem to be. When it comes to the mass public, individuals can be different, but it seems like the mass public reacts the same way. It's just interesting to me. So yeah, that's a good point about the mask, right? How we're looking at it differently today than we are back then, but not so much. All right, so it's Carlos and Christopher. All right, Jesse and Joaquin, I'm gonna unmute you two, and give me your honest opinion about the documentary. Again, a compare and contrast, or maybe just a particular point of the documentary you found interesting. You guys are quiet. Don't tell me it's because lunch. All right, Joaquin, I know you're a adventurous soul. You want to go first? We may be having some technical difficulties, class. Hello? Hello? All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on, but I'm not going to forget you two. All right, so it's all truncated here for me. Carolyn and Kathy. Give me your feedback on the film.
I found it interesting how they ran out of caskets.
Right, because they were still burying people, and they ran, and
Yeah.
caskets were something that they were stealing. Okay, that's interesting. So I didn't focus too much on that, other than people were stealing them. Why do you think they did that? I mean, just because there wasn't enough wood, there wasn't enough people to build them. Right, if they're stealing caskets, they're probably stealing other stuff too. How do you think food was and other resources? Anything else interesting about that? Anything? Kathy?
I from the documents I saw like how the streets were empty just like now, like how Las Vegas or like New York was not as packed as it used to be.
Yeah, right. So they knew back then that distancing helped, right? And so that was just that was something that we're doing now. We know that it works now or it helps. And so they knew back then that it helps. Again, that 1918 pandemic wasn't the first time that generation had gone through um, a mass spread of an infection. So what do you think about so can you add any more to that? The streets being emptied, the streets being cleared.
Hey, sir, what happened?
Oh, Joaquin.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I'm just assuming you had technical difficulties. So go ahead and jump on in. So give me something about the film that spoke out to you, something you remember.
Well, like all the mask, they're wearing a mask and they just carry on with life. I seen a picture of the Georgia Tech game, and it was this year while this was going on, and they were all watching the football game wearing their masks like that. And those don't even look like real masks; those look like homemade T-shirts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the ones that they're wearing in the documentary, they do look like they're
Yeah.
just cloth. And they're not very fine. They don't really protect against a lot of the
Nah.
they hardly protect against dust either,
Mm.
much less a virus. And so that could have been a reason that those masks weren't provided. I mean, a lot of people died, and the masks they were wearing may have
Might as well
not.
not have
Maybe
worn
one of the maybe one of the reasons that they were getting infected and so many people died. Today, we find that those homemade masks that people make are actually better at keeping, uh, you know, what do you call it, airborne particles from leaving the person's mouth. So it ended up being that our homemade masks were actually better than some of the medical masks. I thought that was interesting from today compared to then. But then they didn't know. They hardly knew about viruses, remember. And 1898 is the time when they finally declared that viruses existed. And had been doing research up until then, like the 90s, 1890s. They were trying to test because they knew bacteria existed, and they suspected something else existed, but they didn't know what it was. And then in 1918, you get hit with this huge viral infection that they don't even know how to protect themselves against.
And then back then, if you didn't want to wear a mask, they killed you. Now they can't do really nothing about it.
Was there a law that you were? I thought I saw that in one of the things that they had laws against you had to wear the mask, just like we do
Yeah,
today. People are trying to develop
yeah.
laws and say you have to wear them.
But they was killing people when they didn't wear them.
Well, again, we've done that today too, unfortunately. Not legally, but some
Yeah.
people took it into their own hands.
Damn.
Yeah. All right, so that was Joaquin, but I didn't hear from Jesse. Kathy, did you have anything else to say? Because you have here, is it my turn?
Not really, just like how they barely like opened the door because they thought that they could get like infected. if they were close or they ever talked to each other face to face.
Yeah. So what do you all think? Let me just throw this question to kind of help the conversation along a little bit. The people that we're hearing from right now, they were kids back in 1918. And so they did this documentary and it was released in 2010. And so they're talking about how they felt as kids during that pandemic. You know, today we see, oh, that's okay, Jesse, your computer was, okay. So, but I still want to hear from you in a second, once I'm done with this little monologue. They were kids back then, and we're good at reporting facts. You can look up a website anywhere and you can get information on the tally on how many people have been infected worldwide, how many people have been infected by state, by city, how many people have recovered, how many people have died. I mean, there's lots of facts right now, but what we don't see is a lot of data on how people are being affected. We're talking about how people are feeling sad. The suicide hotline spiked at the very beginning. I don't know if that's still the same today as it was like a month ago, but it was affecting people, you know, what's the word, viscerally, meaning it affected them in a very personal way. And we're hearing now from in this documentary from people who were alive back then and how their friends were dead and they didn't even know it, and like they weren't even being told. They had to be told by their own parents, and they were alone. They felt isolated. And this is a generation, these kids who may have not been in World War I, but the next thing that was facing them was the Great Depression. And then these are the kids who actually went to war in World War II. I mean, they didn't have a very good upbringing. They saw a different life of America than we see, right? So there's a lot of differences that these kids had to experience than kids today have to experience. But I just kind of wonder, what will you all say in 80 to 90 years if there's a documentary that's being done about this 2020 pandemic? Right. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And Jesse, are you ready to kind of give some feedback on the film? Let me unmute Jesse's microphone. He said he was away from the computer, but he's back now.
Yeah. Sorry, I was hungry and I was at the computer for a while. Yeah, I think it's just interesting to see how the similarities and differences between what they went through and what we're going through.
Give me an example. Can you be specific?
Well, just like from what I've seen on the film and what I've seen online, just when I was casually looking through, there were people who, of course, like wearing masks was a whole thing people had to do back then. People are doing it now, but there were groups that people made that were anti-masks back then, and I think it's sad but kind of funny to know that people realized even back then that wearing masks are important, that it could help stop the spread of the virus or at least slow it down. And people know that now, but either way, people still refuse to wear them.
That's amazing. I'm sorry. So you went and did some background research on this as well, because I didn't get that from the documentary. So I didn't know that. I didn't know there was an anti-mask, what do you call it, initiative back then.
They were small groups that people would, like within the town, just make amongst themselves.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you went above and beyond. That's pretty good. And we're doing so. So I initially thought that back then they were just patriotic. They were wearing them and they just maybe weren't effective. But the reality is they were doing the same thing back then as we're doing now. They didn't want to wear them either. Some groups didn't. Wow. Okay. That is interesting. You're going to have to like send me that link because I have to read that. Thank you. Thank you. That is very good input. All right. So where do we leave off? Carolyn, Kathy. I lost track. Carolyn and Kathy, you guys already went, right? Yeah, you just went. Marissa and Valeska. I'm going to unmute you too. and tell me your feedback on the film. What did you think about it? A compare and contrast, anything. Just speak from the heart. You don't have to like be technical.
Okay. Wait, sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. Well, I think it's like the same, but kind of different. Because like you had said, was it like back then how you said that people were like getting murdered for not wearing masks? Was it then that you had said?
Yes. It seemed that there were reported cases where people were murdering others for not wearing their mask.
Okay. Well, I had saw somewhere that they were doing that, like not in here in the U.S., but like somewhere else that they're like going around, and if they like saw somebody that was wearing a mask, they're like threatening to shoot them unless they had a mask on or like put it on. And then like, and then how the video how it like showed the streets empty and everything. It's not like that now. Like everybody's still going out and doing whatever they want to do because they think it's like taking away their rights, like not being able to go out, I guess.
Yeah.
Like if they even like going to the store, they don't wear their mask or anything. And then like some people, like I see, like if I go to the store to get like food that we need, and I see somebody that doesn't have a mask on, they like still cough and sneeze, but don't even like bother to cover their mouth. Like,
oh wow,
they don't care, yeah, like they don't really care about the other people around them unless like it happens to them and they don't believe that's true.
Okay, wow. And so let me just go ahead and kind of clarify that there are countries where it's a law where you will get shot for not wearing a mask. And so in this documentary, I do want to say that even though they seem to have interviewed people from the Northeast, this was happening all over the world back then. And again, it was also happening all over the South where we live. And so even though they didn't interview people from the South, don't think that it didn't happen to our grandparents and so forth. But I just remember that even though you're not being represented in this documentary, it is representing all of us because this happened everywhere. So it's just like a little snapshot. But the thing with shooting people for not wearing masks, there's a country in South America, I think it's Colombia, because I remember it had a big, that's okay, Marissa. You can, so if you want to type in your response, Marissa, that's fantastic. And I'll read it to the class. I think it was the cartels. The cartels started taking things into their own hands by shooting people who are not following the government's policies on trying to distance and wearing masks. And I found that to be interesting, but sort of logical, right? Cartels need people. And if people start dying, they're not going to be able to transport their goods. They're not going to be able to do what they normally do to stay in power. So it wasn't a selfless act. I think it's a selfish act, but it's helping the public. I'm hoping they're really not shooting people.
That's in Colombia, right?
Yeah.
No, they're really shooting people.
Really? Wow. Okay, that's not good then.
Well, people aren't coming outside because they're scared of the cartel. So I mean, they don't have to kill too many people, but the people that wanted to test them, they're really getting killed.
And it's happened here. There's been some arrests here in the United States about people shooting for others for not wearing a mask. And I just thought it was crazy. Okay, so Marissa, let me read your comment to the class. It says, my mic doesn't work, but I thought the documentary was really interesting. It was so extreme. Let me try to read it like a documentary person. It was so extreme back then with the killing people for not wearing masks, whereas today people think they're in the right to not wear a mask, and that is all, and it's all conspiracy. Well, I wouldn't be a good documentary reader. Okay. Conspiracy theories about Bill Gates and the government. It's crazy how much has changed, but yeah, in other countries, people are being killed if they don't obey. Yemen too. Yeah, so we got to remember, this is everywhere. This is everywhere. And the conspiracy theories are out. There was conspiracy theories back then as well. It just seems like those types of behaviors are what's constant. Because again, I'm always asking what's the same between today and 1918. And you would think that with the technology that we would just be like be able to knock these things out, we wouldn't have to deal with these the outcomes. But people are still the same. Publics still react the same. Right? Which now makes me think of all those Star Trek movies when they're in the future and they find a vaccine to a virus like by the afternoon, and everyone gets inoculated and they're all safe. No, I'm pretty sure that in reality, even 200 years in the future, people will still start thinking conspiracy and they'll go crazy, you know, that kind of stuff. All right. Did I go through everybody? Okay, that's really good. And Mr. Liu is here. Mr. Liu, do you want to actually talk about anything you saw in the parts of the video you saw and what's going on today? That'd be one crazy red shirt.
Yeah, no, just the things that everyone was mentioning. Like I know Elias was mentioning, like this killed more people than the war. And come and think about this, that they had, the war going on, and then the pandemic, and then of course we know what all happened in the 20s. So everything just took a dive after that. So that part was inevitable. And we're kind of seeing that now with our economy, how the pandemic, is affecting the economy because public health is not well. So if there's no public health, right, you can forget about the economy. And you, as you've seen in Texas, we're trying to force the economy, and it's not really working. We're just trying oh, just get out there. You got this, walk it off. And, that's not a very good approach for the pandemic, especially with something that we've, of course, we have no idea what to do with this. We're still learning, and just to push people out there, to treat this like it was the cold and flu is not a, not a great, great, I'm trying to think of the word I'm trying to think of now. It's not a great strategy at the moment, but we're learning. We'll figure this out. There's tons of lessons to learn from this as well. And but like you were saying, everything has changed, but we know, people aren't changing, right? We have all the information we could possibly need in the palm of our hands at times, and it's just, I'll learn it from a meme.
Yeah. And you're gonna have to explain to everyone else what the red shirt means, because I don't think they know.
The red shirt is just one of the guys in Star Trek. I think he's just like one of the no names. So when I said that there'd be that one crazy red shirt, you'd have that one guy that was like, "Oh, I don't like that Spock. I don't like what he's doing to us." Just like Spock's in a chipless. But if they're in the future like that, they're probably like beyond chipped. When you really think about it.
The red shirts are the ones who die at the beginning of the movie. Yeah.
Yeah. So the crazy red shirt will die eventually, but I'll take one for Spock.
And I hate I had to go a little political here, but you know how they say, "Well, we didn't have a lot of Hispanics in those old shows." Yeah, we did. Because go back and listen to those red shirts. Martinez, Rodriguez, go investigate that area. Ah, they died. That's like, yeah, we died at the very beginning of every Star Trek episode, and they were red shirts. But yeah, so there was a lot of Hispanic people in the, or at least a lot of Hispanic surnames in the original Star Trek series, but they died. I just thought that was crazy. I didn't pick up on that until later. I just knew that the red shirts died quickly, or they were the ones that would bring the plot along. But so one more thing before we finish 11:52, I want to talk about the very end of the documentary. And it was that one lady who, she was a kid, she talked about her experience, and they talked to her at the very beginning, and they talked to her at the very end, and then that one scientist, and they're kind of talking about how we've erased our history. It's like, why aren't we talking about this? Why haven't we talked about this? Why did that just kind of slip away from our memories? And they had their ideas about maybe it was too brutal, maybe it was too, because the people who lived it, they probably didn't want to remember it, because it was just a hard time in their life. But why did we forget it until this pandemic popped up? Right? Because I don't remember. I remember hearing the word Spanish flu, but it never really sunk in until this pandemic popped up, and the similarities between the 1918 pandemic and this particular pandemic. Again, this is a question open to the whole class. Why do you think we forgot? Why do you think we chose not to remember? Why do you think there's so much to learn from back then, yet we kind of chose to look the other way? And it's understandable from the kids who lived it. Some of those kids were close to your age, and some were a little younger. That's why they're kind of still alive now. But why did society choose to just not look at that time and use it as a learning point. Anybody? This is open to the whole class. Right. So that's what sparked us to kind of look at it. It wasn't seen as relevant until now. And so now we're kind of forced to look back. And I said, oh, that's another one. This society could have been distracted. I'll definitely say we have a lot of distractions since the rise of the internet. We have so many things that are distracting us, and we're not looking at our history. We're kind of just looking at our immediate need for that quick fact, that quick, piece of information, but we're not really using that information to do any kind of critical thinking, I think. We're so close. We have all this information, but we're not using it properly. And arrogance, right? This is America. Oh, that definitely happened, right? So back in 2002, 2009, when we had the H1N1, we had the, I forgot that other virus. I think H1N1 was 2009, but there was the one in 2002, the SARS, the MERS. I remember hearing people talk about the East and the Middle East. And it's like, oh yeah, and they would, they wouldn't say anything derogatory, but their tone was like, oh yeah, look how they are over there. It's kind of like, that's how they live, and that's what they get, kind of like their country's polluted, blah blah blah. And now it's here. We never thought it would happen here. We never thought we'd see in America where people were wearing masks. And why? We probably didn't look back to 1918, just 100 years ago, where we were that country wearing masks. And Bianca, I think because it was a traumatic event, sometimes when you experience a traumatic event, your mind will block it out. Now that's true for the people who actually experienced it, right? The ones who lost their friends, and they found themselves alone now in society because the people they grew up with, the people they played with, were no longer there at such a young age. That was heartbreaking. And so maybe for them, they kind of want to look forward and not look back. But then again, remember, they also had the Depression right after that. And then they had World War II. And these are the people who went to World War II. So they didn't really have much of a break in life. And Kathy says, probably because they thought that if they wouldn't bring it up, then it had never happened because of how it hit them. So that's true, right? You put this mental block on something traumatic. And this happens a lot. This happens a lot in tragedy and traumatic events. People will actually block it. During the military, I never thought that so many helicopter missions would have affected me until I saw this. I got an award for like doing 300 and something helicopter missions. And I looked at the dates, and they were like within 3 months. And when you're out there, you don't really realize you're like morning, day, and night. You're doing some kind of helicopter mission, and then you look back and think, "Oh shoot, that was a lot," And I used to have like a little PTSD with fans, and I used to hear helicopters, and if I would hear anything that would have that helicopter sound, that I was back in the war, and but I blocked it. I didn't. I just thought it was over. I was like, oh, that's over, and I'll never have to think about that again. I'm a civilian. I'm going to just live my life. But it crept up. It was still there. But I found a way to block it. I was just surprised that I could block it until I had a moment like that. And then it was, Billy! No, just kidding. All right. And, thank you for the link to the article. Thank you. Francisco Anti-Mask League, 1918.
You was doing 100 missions a month.
Was it?
Yeah. 3 months.
I would say it was probably maybe it was a 3 month period, maybe a little more, maybe like 3.5 months. But that was a lot. It was a lot. And I have this little certificate. I have a little award. And I just, when you get these back then, you think like, yeah, you put it in there. It's good for promotion. You don't even think about what you just did. You don't even think about it. It's just, you're just moving and you're busy and you just, yeah. I try to show it to a friend and I try to read it to her, and because I was kind of impressed by myself, like, wow, I can't believe I did this. And she's like, yeah. And I thought, I was like, well, anyway, you block it out. Anyway, so that's what I was saying, you block it out. And I didn't realize how I blocked it out until one day I was in the Health Science Center. And the helicopter, the AirLife helicopter, brings patients in, and they fly and they drop them off on top of the on top of the hospital. Yeah, I had like a little flashback. It was the first time that ever. It's the only time that ever happened. But I blocked it. And I was like, wow, what? I said, I better actually give this some attention because it may creep up on me some other time when I don't want it to. Um, Anything else about the 1918 war? I mean, war. The 1918 pandemic. Well, there was a war going on during that time. One last thought, right? We had the armistice signing in November 11th, 1918. And it said, they even said there in the documentary that it was possibly because we ran out of people to fight a war. What do you think we would have been if this? I know this pandemic was horrible, and it killed more people than all the campaigns and wars in the 20th century combined. It killed more people than World War I, World War II. I think they mentioned Korea, and they didn't mention everything else, but I think they did say everything in that century. So it killed more people than all of those campaigns put together. And where would we have been if we didn't stop that war? Would we have been still fighting, killing ourselves another way? Did that pandemic actually in some way save mankind in a dark way? You don't have to answer that, but just something to think about. And I just realized I'm recording, and I just recorded part of my military record on a recording, but that's okay. I'll send it to Lou, and he'll like block out that part. All right, so I want to thank you very much for the time and for this wonderful discussion. Tomorrow we are going to start a new lecture, and again, it's a PowerPoint lecture. It's got embedded videos, and it's called I call it Coronavirus, COVID-19, and the Respiratory System. Because remember, coronavirus and COVID-19 are not the same thing. Coronavirus is the actual virus. COVID-19 is the disease. So just to make sure that we're separating those two terms. And we're going to talk specifically about the respiratory system and how it affects the respiratory system. We already know anatomy and physiology of the respiratory system. Now we're going to look at an in-depth look at how COVID-19 affects the cells of the respiratory system. And so you have a better idea of what's happening out there to patients who go through this. And that's it. I want to thank you so much. It was a great discussion.